Welcome to the Provoke Media Podcast. I'm Megan Miller, the host of today's episode and head of content partnerships here at Provoke. With us today, we have Armando Triana, SVP of social media at Coin PR, where he oversees the social media practice, and Henry Langer, VP of customer success at Julius, an influence marketing platform that helps marketers run influencer marketing campaigns more efficiently. In today's episode, we're exploring the state of the influencer space, how it's evolved from the pandemic, really from parents seeking advice to raise their family, at-home chefs looking for their next tasty recipe, or the traveler looking for their daily dose of Wonderlist. Influencers are educating and entertaining a growing number of our audiences. While this industry was already clipping along at a rapid pace pre-pandemic, the space has really started to explode. So we're excited to have Armando and Henry both here with us today to unpack that a little bit more. So good to have you both. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Armando, I'll kick it over to you first, but it's safe to say, like, this space has always kind of felt like the wild, wild west, whether that's to PR agencies, publishers, marketing, but it's steadily becoming more and more known and defined. From your experience, how have you seen this space change from the perspective of PR agencies?
Sure. Well, again, thank you for having me on here. I think, what we have seen the last few years is really with the rise of these online influencers and social media platforms overall becoming more sophisticated, is really a growing audience across the social space, across with these online influencers. And, online influencers for a PR agency isn't anything too new when you think about it, right? PR a long time ago was you got your celebrity in place for a campaign. Then it was bloggers and mommy bloggers. It's really just kind of filling in the next evolution of who influences people, that word of mouth that we all know, whether it's a friend or a family member. Now it's online, and it's people that are gaining trust. They're allowing people into their lives behind the scenes, what they're doing, and they're building that relationship with those followers. And so really with that trust, we've seen, honestly, in the last few years, budgets shift from other communications and marketing disciplines to influencer. And we have brands, companies, CMOs, PR folks saying, we need to reach a target audience and we want to use influencers to do so. So have seen a big shift of marketing and communication budgets shifting over to the influencer space.
Absolutely. And Henry, you obviously work with many companies who are all kind of trying to make this shift and streamline it all. What are some of the changes that you've seen in the needs that have come to you from the agency and publisher perspectives?
Yeah. And just to echo Armando, thank you very much to Provoke and also to Coin for having me today. So I think one thing that's definitely changed is that there's a little bit of more of like a legitimization around our discipline. It used to be that the team members that we were working with at brands or at agencies would be kind of straddling a lot of different kinds of disciplines. Maybe they worked in digital, maybe they worked in public relations. But now what we're finding is that there are entire departments whose job it is to really focus on influencer. And that echoes just the size of the industry and how it's really exploded, especially over the COVID-19 pandemic. So now, instead of working with someone who at the same time is maybe building out a website or working on a press release, you're working with a team, or my team is working with team members on the client side who are working with influencers 24/7, 365. And that just really speaks to just the size of the industry and where it's gone from when we started Julius, a couple years ago.
Just like from a foundational, fundamentals perspective here, as we start this conversation, what both of you have kind of talked about, like how so many departments previously were kind of owning this space a little bit, and everybody had a small stake in the decision of influencers for their brand or their client. is it safe to say that there's kind of like two categories of use cases for an influencer, and how, from a PR perspective, we're thinking about them, and a conversion perspective, we're thinking about them? Henry, is that something or that you're seeing at all with the way people are using their influencers?
Absolutely. So I think there is like a little bit of a misconception now, which is that you have to choose whether or not the goal is to drive, awareness or conversion. In reality, what we're often finding is that a brand's appetite for the trade-off between, brand awareness and conversion is typically a spectrum. And where a brand falls in that spectrum is going to just vary based on what it is that they're looking to accomplish.
Yeah.
So it's impossible to not spread the word about something on social media. That's the intrinsic point of social media. It's just about whether or not the goal is to get someone to click, a trackable link and use a tokenized system to get through to checkout and understand that information, or if you're just really just trying to get the word out.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. I mean, like, I'm thinking about like your role, Armando, and how that's really changed, even in the way like Coin has structured your social media practice. Like, like my background prior to this role at Provoke was working from a publisher side, and we'd encounter a PR agency, we'd encounter a media agency, we'd maybe talk to the brand, and everybody's like investing in this persona or face of a brand or a message or a campaign. But really it's like such an optimal place for PRs to for PR to own that. And I'm so interested in how that's informed like developing your social media practice.
Sure. Absolutely. So I think, overall, as you mentioned, influencer feels so, natural to fall within PR. And I think, how we have it at Coin and really the growth of the social media practice has really been more around when we want to work from a contracted perspective with some influencers. We still have our PR colleagues who they work more of the non-contracted influencer. So really, when we're looking at a campaign, a product launch, just overall brand awareness, we can fit in multiple types of influencers, different tiers, but also different objectives. Maybe they're being part of, they're receiving a mailer, we're seeding them product. My PR colleagues are handling that while we're working on more of what's the digital content look like? What are they doing across the space? Is there a live experience, Instagram live experience? What does a TikTok, content look like there? And really bringing that all together. So there's that online digital content. They might be at the event as well, in real time, sharing behind the scenes stories, on their Instagram account. So kind of having this multi-layered approach to influencer, really working hand in hand. And at the same time, we do work with, clients who have other, agencies, creative agencies, media agencies. We'll work very closely with them if we're looking at that digital content. We want to amplify that a little bit more through some paid support, or it might be a full-on advertising campaign. We'll work very closely with them. We're sourcing, identifying the influencers, working through all the logistics, and then working with that media agency, to go in, provide that paid support, amplify that, drive some more conversions, drive, to target audiences a little bit deeper, and working hand in hand to make sure, every campaign is successful.
Yeah.
What's interesting about, sorry to
no, go for it. That's great.
Something that's so interesting about what Armando just said in that answer is listen to how many disciplines just came out of his mouth. You had advertising, you had paid social, you had digital, so influencers have infiltrated everything, right? And it's just about, how you integrate them into your strategy. And I think that the best influencer marketing campaigns that we see feel holistic. They're plugged into, a larger strategy that involves multi-channel, because what happens so often is that, a brand comes up with an influencer strategy and it's just, we're just going to have the influencer post about this on social media, but the conversation has grown to be so big and your share of voice with that one post is so small now that if you aren't coming up with other ways to build legs for those campaigns, it's just going to fall on deaf ears. And I think that's one thing that we see Coin do really well, is thinking about paid social amplification, and then what are the other PR avenues to get the word out about the content. That's going to make sure that it hits more eyeballs.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, just to add to that, I think going back to how seeing dollars shift over to influencer, sometimes it's still educating, right? And we'll have clients ask us, hey, I just need to do influencer. They don't really know why. They just know, hey, my kids mentioned, right? And or other people, I have my team telling me we need to do influencer. But they don't really know exactly what to do and where to go. And obviously, that's why my team Coin is there to help and support and guide. And really, to Henry's point about kind of having that holistic, integrated approach. We never, just like social media, right? Own social media. You never want necessarily a social campaign to live siloed. And same thing with influencer. We don't want it to live silo. How does this go across brand objectives versus just, there's a piece of content that lives on Instagram? Because if it just lives there by itself, I can tell you right now, at the end of the campaign, it probably might not get the results that we were hoping for. Right. We're talking about this larger approach, and it's definitely how can influencer be integrated across communication and marketing, campaigns, objectives. Overall, that's when, again, we see the most success.
I can't help but think of this metaphor that's kind of like in the healthcare industry right now for internal health communications, where patients have so many different points of care, but there's nobody at that hub. And so they find out, like, you're on this medication that's actually compromising this medication, and this one's cannibalizing that, and these two are counteracting. Like, it's such a logical space for a PR agency to really be that central point of care, or like the center of the hub that all these spokes of other efforts are coming out of. Just because if you're going to invest in brand, like this face of your brand in any capacity, it should be strategic across all of the points, just to maximize your reach and the impact of it. It's really,
we saw right in, the 2010 through like 2016 timeframe was like this unpacking. It used to be like the AOR was the buzzword, and you had agencies of records for specific brands. When I started in the industry, that's what the reality was. But then, fast forward just a couple of years later, and you have agencies saying we're the official AOR specifically for social media, specifically for this brand, specifically within that umbrella, right? And so the issue there is exactly what you said, Megan, which is that, there's a lack of continuity of voice. Because if the influencers sound one way, but the brand voice sounds another way, customers are really smart now. If they know what Charmin is supposed to sound like, right? They know that they're a liquor company. They know that they don't have some sort of elaborate, massive, voice, but that they're very tongue in cheek. If you go and you work with, a celebrity influencer to push that, it's possible that isn't going to work as well as a mom blogger who's going to maybe be a little bit more campy in their content. If you've got two different agencies doing those two different campaigns, it's possible that the left hand isn't talking to the right hand. And so, consolidation is something that could be coming as sort of the next frontier because of that. Because if you don't get that right, customers are going to start to know that. They're becoming a little bit more in tune with just how many different ways they're being spoken to.
It can feel so fragmented when you're, whether it's a car brand and you're working with the new model release next to the legacy model, and each one has its own team. And then there's like 3 separate media teams out of that. Those voices really do sound different, or the purpose behind the influencers or the strategy behind why those influencers have been chosen can feel really disconnected. Yeah,
and a lot of the times, when we go in and with a new client or a new campaign, we want to take inventory. We want to understand all, we ask the questions of, we want to understand everything that's happening. We ask for their social strategy to understand what is it that they're doing. How can influencer partnership content activations help to support that? What are they doing from a media perspective? So again, going back to your point of being the hub, and it's simply just asking the questions, why do you want to do influencer? Sometimes clients don't know. Sometimes they have a very clear objective, such as we don't have a social media team and we need great content and we just need people to create content for us. Again, going back to advertising. So really just unpacking all of that, understanding all the different things that are happening, and then really providing that strategic recommendation on how, where, why, and what type of influencers are most important.
Yeah, and Armando, I think that that's something that's so often overlooked as a value that influencers can bring as content creators, not only as their own intellectual property as a vehicle, right? So, by that I mean, if you're sitting there watching an ad and you see a paid spokesperson speaking the ad versus if you see a scale actor, oftentimes you're looking at that scale actor and you're like, is that an influencer? Is that someone that I'm supposed to know who that is? And when it's not, there's that feeling of disappointment, right? Yeah. And so the same goes on social media. You're kind of like looking at a brand's channel and you're like, is this someone I'm supposed to know? And when the answer is yes, there is that feeling of like fulfillment that brand is in the relevant space, not in the irrelevant space. And so the ability to repurpose content on your own social channels is really important. And when you think about what influencers cost versus what it costs to hire an actor and then pay a photographer and then set up a photo shoot, oftentimes it's really cost effective to have influencers create content for you.
Stan, I'm going to throw something out to the crowd here, curious for both perspectives, but the position on, or if you have a position on heavily managing the content that comes out of an influencer, or like what's the sweet spot for letting it retain that influencer's own brand voice, and then also like watching it for brand safety on your client side?
So I think if we're talking the pharma space, there are, that's one place where, creativity and all of that has some limitations. I think other regulated industries as well, but I think overall, when we talk about a lot of our, consumer space verticals, travel, food and recipe, parenting, CPG, things like that, all the time we say, we need to have that balance. 100% do not want to have prescriptive content that's not natural to the influencer's voice. So it is, again, this balance of making sure that there's brand messaging and whatever the brand objectives incorporated, but it needs to come through very naturally in the influencer's voice. They know what works on their channels. They know what followers respond to, engage with, what they like, what they don't like. So we, a lot of the times it's again, going back to educating our clients to, having that balance, making sure you have a very solid brief in the very beginning of here's everything that we want to incorporate, and really keeping messaging down, boiling it down to two main points. You want to keep, if there's too many messages, it just comes across very scattered. You want to have it be very focused. And so we always say that we can provide a brief, we can provide guidance, but letting the influencer take it from there and letting them most of the time, it's the content's better than we could ever have imagined, because they understand how to weave in, especially the influencers that have been doing this for many years now. They have, this is their business, this is their job. They understand how to work with brands. They understand how to incorporate all these things in a very natural way, authentic way to them. And really, making sure that at the end of the day, they're meeting the KPIs, whether that's, video views or engagements or reach, because, they understand that a reel works better than a story, or whatever that may be, and the type of setting that makes most sense to drive the best results with their followers.
And
Yeah, like one thing I'll tell my clients frequently is that your feedback for influencers should be about factual accuracy and
Okay.
not about style. If you're a pharma brand, that's a great example. You read my mind, Armando. There are some serious repercussions that could come, and also some serious, like, scary outcomes that could come from talking about the brand in the wrong way. But if you're not in the pharma space and you're pushing a CPG brand and you're pushing something where there is less risk, you really, the only thing that you want to be telling an influencer that they've done wrong is potentially that they're not using the right FTC compliance language, because you could be liable, or just that that they didn't say the right thing about the product. Other than that, style wise, you need to let them do their thing. I'm a broken record now, because now I've said this 3 times, but just audience members are smarter than they've ever been. They are looking, they're sniffing for that BS factor every single time, right? And so when they're like, oh wow, an influencer found a way to really say this thing that might have been a little bit canned, but they said it their way, that's when it really hits. That's when it really works. And that's when you say, this is an integration that I should look at, right? But when it's like, they fed them the copy and they copied and pasted it, it's gonna not work. Brands are really should not be doing that. It's a mistake.
And
honestly, what happens also, what also happens is, we're all, yes, you have a contract. Okay, yes, we're paying, I'm paying you to just do the content, but at the end of the day, this relationship that you're building. And if you can really have magic happen from, a content piece between an influencer and a brand, it can evolve and grow into something really great. And this more long-term partnership versus just like this one-off. And to Henry's point, audiences can see, they just like took the check, dialed it in. It's like, it was just that's what it was, right? And you never want that, right? You want it to be, I'll give you one example. CeraVe is one example of ours that we started working with them, just conducting some social listening, finding authentic influencers who were just loved the brand, were using their products. We, reached out to them to have a more formal partnership. And that first piece of content that was published, the followers went nuts. They were so happy for the influencer because you've been talking about them for years. It's so happy that they heard you, so happy that they listened. So they're fully vested into this influencer, and their life. And, they know what's relevant to them, and that it's not, it truly is this, really nurturing relationship and not a one-off, grab a check and run.
Yeah, I think social listening has made it easier to do that, right? Like the ability to find influencers that are organically speaking about a brand has never been easier. And I think that, being able to use that as a core pillar of your strategy is always going to be really helpful, because audiences don't want to be talked at. They like conversations, right? Social media is a social place. And so if they feel like this is, a layer to a conversation, now the brand is just dipping their toe in to add value, that always is going to work better than a brand just completely out of the blue, sparking a brand new conversation. That's where people are just going to keep scrolling.
Totally. And interestingly enough, though, all this is great in theory. And that's always how the industry has sort of been handled or regarded with clients. But I suspect and know from experience, like it's certainly shifting to the spot of like, how do you show me the ROI? Like that all sounds logical. It all sounds like it makes sense, but that feels risky without a number or a metric that shows me it actually worked. So I don't know who wants to take it. I think, Henry, that's very much your space. You've seen the success across many companies. Armando, you've obviously probably seen it with your own clients, but any good examples out there that either of you can think of, like anecdotally, of where that risk has really paid off, and the types of metrics that you're using to support the strategy?
Yeah. So
I should have picked one of you. It's my fault.
Let me, Henry, if you don't mind, I'll just go in, I'll throw in one great example again, and then you,
Great.
from kind of just larger, the context you have there. So I'll throw in, a L'Oreal brand, CeraVe again. When we started working with them, they only had about a handful of influencers that they worked with. They knew they wanted to do a little bit more. And when we talk about success, it's really, they just wanted, it was focused on just getting some awareness. And that's really where our focus was. And we worked with strategic partners to do so. And over the last couple of years, it has built into, if you read the online stories or you follow TikTok, it has led to products not being able to be found on shelves because people are just buying all of the CeraVe products. So when we talk about ROI, again, when you ask the questions in the beginning, you understand what is it that you're looking to do. And here's how we can get you there, right? And if it's reach, if it's conversions, and really, putting it down on paper so everyone's on the same page, because everyone has a different understanding. Some people think that they're going to work with 100 influencers and have 1,000 pieces of content, with a very limited budget. And so it's just setting those expectations of this is what the budget can do to meet your objectives, and getting there.
Mhm. And Henry, like on the performance side, like the ability to measure any of that, we can say hypothetically, none of us can find a Stanley mug on the shelves right now. Probably an influencer did that. But like when we actually need to quantify it, I think that's places where like Julius comes into the equation. But any success stories that you've seen where you've really been able to like tell that ROI story?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think just like one of the biggest metrics that's being used on the awareness side is the concept of earned media value. So earned media value is the dollar amount that you've garnered in media as a result of working with that influencer. And the reason why it's such an important metric, especially for people who are going to be listening to this podcast, for example, is that it's a metric that you use for other forms of media too. So when you're talking about the success of a print ad or an ad on the side of a bus, the purveyors of those, the publishers or the people who sell that space will always give you those results in earned media. So being able to compare and contrast what you've garnered in earned media from an influencer campaign to other forms of media are really important, because as Armando mentioned at the top of the podcast, this money that's flowing into the influencer marketing industry, growing by 40+% over COVID, isn't because more money is being spent by brands on marketing. It's because they're taking money from other places. So if you're going to justify that, you need to be able to compare and contrast the success of these campaigns to success of campaigns that have absolutely nothing to do with influencer marketing. And so that's where, on the awareness side, that's really important. Then on the conversion side, it's really important that brands put the appropriate tracking in place to at least try and get a grasp of attribution. Things like tracking links, tokenized systems via UTM, and then all the way through to checkout data. Really important pieces of feedback if you're looking for more like a call to action based campaign. I think the integration of point of sale apps like Shopify and Magento and WooCommerce into the space have made it a lot easier to get that information. And that's why they're so popular with brands. Because you do have that ability to get that feedback via things like coupon codes and tracking links. And so, like I said in the beginning, it depends on where you fall on the spectrum in terms of which of these metrics you're going to use. But the underlying theme is that if you looked at a RAP report in 2016, 2017, it's talking about likes and comments. Here, we're talking about a completely different set of metrics that are way more evolved. And it speaks to just how far the industry's come in terms of becoming, like I said at the beginning, a legitimized practice.
Yeah. There's as a consumer, I've been seeing I think it's an interesting trend, but perhaps I'm not sure if it's like an actual strategy out there at the moment. But I've seen more and more influencers who are like they've gotten the wardrobe haul from whatever store, and they'll try it all on, but like the first 3 things they won't like this didn't look great on me, I'm not keeping it. And they'll go to, and it'll be like the last 2 items that they'll like and keep. And I'm like, God, that's a scary step for a brand to like trust that approach is going to work. But honestly, as a consumer, I'm like, I believe it a lot more to know that like that doesn't look good on everybody. And we all know that every store isn't for every single person, or every item in a store isn't. So any thoughts on that? I'm just interested.
I think the riskiest part about that is just how like short the consumer's attention span has gone.
Mm-hmm.
In a move from YouTube to TikTok like crazy. And you think about long form to short form content. I think COVID had a lot to do with that. People were at home, they were bored, they wanted to just cram as much content into their brains as possible. And when you have to watch, a 3-minute style haul, it's not going to happen. So the biggest risk you're taking if you don't like those first 3 pieces of content is that by the time you get to the one that you do like, actually someone's moved on from the content. So if you're going to do that, you need to make sure you have a really good hook at the opener. Make sure you retain people's attention.
And I think it goes back to the following as the followers and the audience of the influencer as well, right? And that influencer feels comfortable with their audience, that they can take them along this journey back to the longer video. To me that also speaks to like the trend of here's what I ordered, right? And it's this fabulous photo shoot shot, and then here's what I got, and it's like the top is too short or it's too long, and it's that funny kind of fail moment. So it's almost is it piquing that interest or like getting that like attention? What is it going to look like? Is it going to look awful? It's going to be a funny moment, and then kind of walking through or taking the follower through that storytelling experience.
Yeah.
Armando, you had a line in a conversation we had that I really liked, and this is just like I'm prompting you to speak further. You mentioned you think that the TikTok influencer is the new Netflix original.
Yeah.
What came to mind as you were saying that?
Yeah. I think, we talked about COVID, right? And we talked about the beginning of COVID. TikTok was known as, the teenage young adult platform, I think Facebook 15 years ago. But then through the pandemic, when there was all this doom scrolling happening and all this bad news, people were looking for an outlet. TikTok was already there. There was adults who may have downloaded it, but they didn't really go on it. All of a sudden now they find themselves, getting served all this great content from influencers, from regular people that now are turning into influencers over the course of the pandemic. That's with all this relatable content that they're interested in, whether it's recipes, whether it's nostalgia. There's a lot of nostalgia out there, like, 90s babies, 80s babies, that type of thing. They're creating a lot of this content that now their followers are just going down a rabbit hole and just consuming, minutes, hours at a time. 2 hours have passed and you're like, what have I done with myself? This is what we used to do when the new Netflix original came out. I mean, think of Tiger King at the beginning of the pandemic. We were all watching and we all binged it, right? We were all together in terms of watching this crazy documentary. And now we all have that same, community on TikTok with the like-minded people. And we all are, know the latest sayings, the latest trends, the latest, dance challenge, whatever it may be. We're all sharing in that, and we're all binging on that, honestly, as well.
Such a fun metaphor to kind of wrap up here on today when we think about just the common thread that unites us all. It's a comedian on TikTok. At the end of the day, we can all relate to whatever that one story was. Also, the throwback to Tiger King, like, I can't believe the pandemic was that long ago. That feels really long ago, or started that long ago.
Long ago that there's now a fictional version of Tiger King.
Right.
Bringing you our own dose of nostalgia here on the Provoke Media Podcast. Oh gosh, you guys, this has been so fun to chat with both of you. A conversation that very much could have gone on for several minutes, hours to come. Thank you both for being here, Henry and Armando. Just a great episode of the Provoke Media podcast. Thank you to Coin for sponsoring. Yeah, guys, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much
Appreciate
for
it.
having us. We'll talk to you, Megan.
Thanks. Talk soon. Bye, everybody.